We have Wall Street Journal Main Street columnist Bill McGurn, who's going to preview his column tomorrow on President Reagan and today's Romney Republicans. Bill?
Hey, Mary, how you doing?
Welcome. Very well, thanks. Last but not least, because this is a very interesting topic. Now, there's been a lot of angst out there about the quality of the Republican candidates for president. Do you think that that's warranted?
Well, to some degree, but what was interesting is I went back to the Washington Post and the New York Times at just about this week in 1980 to see where we were. And the parallels are the same. Everyone was complaining about the quality of the Republican candidates. Gerald Ford came in to say that Ronald Reagan could not win a national election and that he himself was available if people wanted to draft him in the way that some people want to draft Chris Christie or Mitch Daniels or Jeb Bush today. So it's just fascinating to see that the conventional wisdom hasn't changed much.
Well, you know, let's dig into some of those parallels. One of them was the idea that somehow Reagan was a flawed candidate. He had a record as governor of California. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, it wasn't so much that he was flawed, but we tend to look back at Reagan through this prism of his presidency, where he was immensely successful. He brought down the Berlin Wall. He attracted all sorts of Democrats into the party, and he revived the U.S. economy. But all that was in the future then. When he was running, he was a governor who had signed the most liberal abortion law in the country in California, had pushed for and passed the largest tax increase in California state history, and as George H.W. Bush, one of his chief rivals, would point out, had entered office in California with a $4.6 billion state budget and left with a $10.2 billion state budget. So there was a record there. There were gaffes. Just about this time, in early February, Reagan had told an ethnic joke involving Italians and Poles, for which he apologized, and for which, remarkably, the New York Times defended him. So all sorts of things.
Wow, and anything can happen. And amazing. Well, I'm glad you brought up abortion. I wanted to talk to you about the role of religion in that campaign. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in this campaign about social conservatives, religious conservatives. What can we learn from the early days?
Well, I think in those days, in the primaries, it didn't loom quite as large. For one thing, that these evangelicals were new to the process, and they were just kind of forming. Reagan appeared before a group of them in Dallas, I believe, in August, and famously said to them, "I know you can't endorse me, but I endorse you." A very clever use of them. So it was all coming to the stage. Again, you read the Times, you read some of the conventional wisdom. I think it was either Anthony Lewis or Scotty Reston saying they were glad that Reagan was the nominee in the White House, in the Carter White House, because they thought he would be just the man to drive like disaffected labor people and so forth back into the arms of the Democratic Party. And of course, Reagan created a whole new term, Reagan Democrats.
Right. We're talking with the Wall Street Journal columnist, Main Street columnist Bill McGurn. So given all of that, given the historical parallels between the angst about the candidates in 1980 and the angst about the candidates today, what could a Mitt Romney then learn about how to conduct his campaign or how to rise above the criticism today? What advice would you give
I would say
him?
the main advice is don't let yourself be limited by the conventional wisdom. Everyone just thought Reagan was too conservative to win, that he couldn't win. The one difference today and then is today Reagan was running, back then Reagan was running against three men who were more liberal or moderate than he was, whereas today Romney's running against three people who profess at least to be more conservative than he is. I'm not sure Reagan would have looked as good if he were trying to distinguish himself from other conservatives. So he had a big advantage on the sort of ideology. But on the other side, just as running, you know, people thought Reagan just couldn't do it, and they were looking for Ford. The Ford thing was a big thing. You know, they talked about a co-presidency at the convention and so forth because people, you know, thought Reagan was scary. And I think he just showed to stick with your platform, make distinctions, and move ahead. I think Governor Romney started to do that with the tax plan. I think he needs to go further on the health care plan. I think Senator Santorum is right that he's kind of handicapped by his Romney care, and that a federalist explanation probably isn't going to cut it.
Bill, is there a risk that you're going a little bit too far with these analogies and that actually there isn't a Ronald Reagan and that we are kind of stuck with the B list of GOP candidates?
But my point was there wasn't a Ronald Reagan in 1980. All the achievements were in the future and so forth. I think you clarify how you get there. Look, Governor Romney's not a movie actor. is not going to give the kind of speeches that Ronald Reagan is. But there's no need for him to be weighed down by the conventional wisdom that he's too rich, too out of touch, and this. People doubted Reagan's ability to connect for a long, long time. And I think Reagan had his message, didn't back down from his message, and clarified his message. I think Governor Romney, for all the faults that he has, and I'm not endorsing him, but for all the faults that he has, when he comes out of that convention, assuming that he's made his peace with the other candidates, people are going to be enthusiastic about him because this election's a referendum on Barack Obama.